I'm Leland Pauly, P-A-U-L-Y, no E.
And how old are you now?
87, a month and a half short of 88. My family, they moved here in 1919 from Plumas County.
And how long have you lived in Camptonville?
A little bit off and on since 1924 when I was born. But my older brothers had to go to school, high school. My oldest brother had to go to high school, and they just started the high school within the next year or two. And it was just a 5-person high school branch of the Marysville one. But he went because my other brother and my sister, they were getting closer to the high school age. And so they all went down to my grandmother's, had a house in San Jose, and they went to the San Jose school until we moved back to Marysville after my oldest brother graduated from San Jose High School, and we moved to Marysville because they could go to Marysville High School there. And my brother was in the first year crew at Yuba Junior College. They didn't even have a track team yet. And see, track was a great big doings in San Jose. Things that they didn't like, and racing bicycles. Everybody had racing type bicycles. And so he had done all of this track stuff. So he and another fellow, you may have known Sanford, worked for the PG&E as a land guy for years and years. You know him? Well, he and my brother, they were the whole, and one other guy they raped in, they were the whole track team. They did all the things. My brother just loved that track team. He had us, not in the garage, he had us out here in the back pasture throwing the discus when we were little kids.
So tell me about your early years here in Camptonville.
In Camptonville, my mother got a teaching job back. She quit the teaching job back when we were born, my youngest brother and I come back there when I was in the first grade.
Right, and she taught it in Strawberry Valley.
Yeah, in between.
And how big was that school?
How big was what?
How many students were at the school in Strawberry
Oh,
Valley?
just about like Campton, just a smattering of them. Had my own desk. I went up to school every day, just like the rest of them. I learned everything in the first grade, and then I had to go through it again next year when I come over here.
Was Camptonville a great place to grow up?
Yes. Now, you understand these mountain places, they had summer school. They didn't have winter school because of the snows. And that started to break up because the cars were taking over to where they were getting snowplows for the roads. And see, Strawberry Valley is just about like Campton, a little bit higher. And that's where the snow starts on that route. And Camptonville is where the snow starts on this route. So my dad come over, moved from Mohawk. When he had these contracts over here, he still lived over in Mohawk. My grandmother had a house in the town of Mohawk right next to hers that they rented. And that's where my older brothers and sister went to school in the Mohawk school. And my mother taught there for a little while before she came here. And she came here in 1919 when the school was still all the little schools. There were 4 little schools. The Camptonville one was called the Slate Range School. That's because even though the Slate Range is over in the river, that was the district was named, the location. And then they had the Celestial Valley School, and it was up on the Marysville Road because there weren't enough people in Celestial Valley left. And then at Oak Valley, there's quite a few people there. They had a school. And then they had a school out at Mill Creek where all the ranchers were, and the Humphrey family had about 8 or 10 kids. I don't know, they had 5 boys, and I knew them all, but the ones that were older than I was weren't around in later years, and so I can't be exact on that. But anyhow, the next year, after my mother came here, they unified all the schools. So from then on, it's been a unified school, but it shut down in December, January, and February, and picked up again in March.
Let me ask you, so was there many fun activities to do here as a kid?
Yes.
Is that where you developed your your love for hunting and the outdoors? And
oh, well,
hiking?
brother and I, everybody in our family were great on fishing, including my dad. But on hunting, that just picked up with my brother and I, because our good friends were hunters. So we picked up on hunting, and then later on, they both started hunting to a degree, but never like we did every hunting season. In other words, and that's the nice part about it. You didn't have to go anywhere; you just went out your back door. And Mackey's Hill's right there, where every kid in Camptonville learned to hunt.
So is that where you learned so much about this great area?
No. I learned about this area right in close. We didn't have to go very far. Well, we didn't have any cars, although later on we did have. See, you're 12 years old before you get a license, so we just hunt around here on foot. And we just, a little at a time. And hey, by the time I was growing up and went in the Army, about as far as we went was Graveyard Hill. That's only about 5 miles. And that was a long way to go. And the guys that logged knew that whole country out there towards the river where the ranches were on the Mill Creek country. And so they knew where the deer were and out there. And so I would go them hunting out there, and I would get lost, because I was used to wandering around Oregon Creek here. Knew everything was in Oregon Creek. And the strangest thing, what you use for locators, you wouldn't realize it now, but were salt licks. Everybody knew where the salt licks were, including the deer. So that was the best place to sneak around, close to the salt licks. That's true. It was always a good place that you could sneak around like a kid. I never killed a deer as a kid. I was growing up and come back from the Army before I managed to bag a deer. But I tell you, the civilians don't take much of the notice of the wars very seriously anymore. You go about your ways just like you always have. But hey, then, when the time when I left, they were the groceries are all you had to buy them with coupons, and you couldn't buy so many gallons of gas a week, and you couldn't buy any shoes anywhere. You couldn't buy any tires. So everybody felt they go. So I was surprised on the fellow I used to hunt with as a kid. I come back. He was an ex-bricklayer from Oakland. He just come up here he didn't like being a bricklayer all his life. He come up here, all these old mines. And so he said, I went out hunting. I said, where you going hunting? It's hunting season. And I come back from overseas, and he says, haven't seen you around for a while. Where you been? Just got through flying 50 missions. Never got much publicity. Life went on as it.
Leland, can you tell us something about your war years? I understand you were a gunner on a bomber.
Armor. That includes bombs and guns in the Air Force. Of course, it includes more than that in artillery and stuff, but that's a little different than the Air Corps. In the Air Corps, it was mainly guns on the airplanes, which was all 150 caliber. Nearly every airplane had 50 calibers. They'd given up on the 30s, just a few special ones, but I had to learn all those first when I went to the school. So in case I took a ground job, they might put you in a place where they had a few B-25s with 75 millimeter cannon in that they reinforced, and P-39s. They had one right outside of our thing there, so I knew what they looked like in Colorado there, in Denver, right outside. We were way out in the outskirts of the field there, and so I knew. See, they had a 37 millimeter cannon mounted between the V and the engine. But everything else was, and once in a while they put the 20 millimeters in special planes for ground fare but they found that 450s in each wing. It was just about as deadly as you can get, but it took a pretty good sized airplane to pack 450s in each wing.
How many missions do you think you flew during the war?
Well, I got credit for 50. But when they had because we were going so far from southern Italy, only the long distance missions where there was greater risk, In other words, the further deeper you went into Germany, the higher there is. They give you a double charge. So I had 36 actual missions and 14 double missions,
And you
which totals up to 50.
You were stationed in a base in Italy?
Yeah. I was immediately, they sent me right to gunnery school from the armor school, and so I had to learn all about 50 calibers all over again. In other words, those were just green guys down there that they had to learn about, but they didn't have to learn the whole bit, like repairing them and so on and forth. And they even had 45 pistols that I had to learn, and God, I couldn't get one apart nowadays if I had to.
These missions were very dangerous.
They were long,
Long
and the danger part was at the Germans were behind in the fighter business by the time I got there. They had long-distance tanks on not only they just reading the books about the Mustang, that's what made them famous. Well, they had droppable tanks on all of them, so that they could take you further in. You had escort, and the Germans they had a hard time keeping enough pilots and the pilots are all greener than when they come from England over. They were going against green gunners, and they massacred everybody. They finally had to quit that. Their limit was 25. You were lucky if you could make 25 missions. Sometimes they'd lose a third of their airplanes. Sometimes we wouldn't lose a one.
Did you have some close calls on your?
Yes, we only got hit, 3 or 4 times with flak. You know, the big danger was getting crippled and having to leave the main flight, because that way the fighters could get to you.
But you were in a squadron.
We flew in squadrons, and
yes.
One mass after another by the hundreds and thousands. I don't know how the Germans could get those oil things back in less than a week, pumping again. You'd bomb them all flat.
Bombing oil fields.
Yes. And once in a while we'd go on a short one, like in northern Italy, railroad station. See, the Germans were still in northern Italy. And we flew clear over the Alps to Switzerland and Germany sometimes, but most of the time we went out by way of the Balkans. And in that country, because the Germans, that's where they had all of their backup. That's all the Romanian oil fields were there. And so they moved all of their anti-aircraft out there, and that was our big danger, because when you fly in a group, you drop your bombs on the lead guy that had a radar. And it was sort of a joke, because the Germans it took us 6 to 8 hours to get there. They had plenty of advance notice, if you see what I mean. And so they lit their smoke pots. You could never see the targets. But they had one ship had the radar on it. And of course, they had the radar on their 88 for anti-aircraft, where they could zero in on you if you flew in a straight line. And the only time you had to fly in a straight line was when you're over the target. And you dropped your bombs when the guy with the radar dropped them. The whole flight, they had 5 or 6 in a flight. And they had one, and then they'd have four groups of these flights together, but usually they'd have a guy that our pilot could see when he dropped his bombs. That's when the bombardier turned the bombs loose. In other words, just mash bombing, all that precision bombing. Well, precision for the guy up in the lead plane. And they had you could easy spot it. It had the dome on it, but the flak was good to say. Well, you had gas tanks that were self-sealing, so you weren't worried about the machine guns except from the fighters. Right. But you were worried about the flak going through and knocking your wiring out in your planes or spoiling. So we only got hit 3 or 4 times with flak, and only once bad enough to cause trouble. And we got into the Army had a newspaper. I mean, Air Force had a newspaper over there, and if you got in there, stuff, it was put in the newspaper. So I say that we got hit in the rudder, which is right alongside of me, a B-24. I'm sitting here. And you got 2 rudders, one out on each side of you, and it knocked the one loose, and it was hanging out there by the cables, flopping in the wing, and he couldn't fly in the formation because he had to slow down, and so we're sitting out there, easy duck, and they said, I got to get rid of that. We're not going to make it all the way back. And he said back a kid, said, can you get your guns around it? I said, no, these guns have a profile on them so you can't shoot down your whole plane. And mine, I'm in this turret here, and I can't get that. Even if I could get at the profiler, I probably didn't have. I don't have any wrenches here to take it out of loose or anything. But why don't you go to the waist guns are right behind me, where they have a window on each side, and they have a single gun on each one of those, and they're run by hand. I said, those are run by hand. If you get enough muscle back there, I'm sure you can see where the profilers are on those, and you can bust it loose. So they pour it loose, and they shot that loose rudder off.
That's great. Great.
And we made it back to the nearest base that we could in Italy. We didn't get back to our own base, but we got back to that other one. But it was kind of funny. People say, you got profilers, so you can't shoot your... That's a necessity. When you're following somebody, your machine gun stops.
Right. So were you glad to get back to Camptonville after the war?
Yes, because you crossed your fingers on every... might be your turn, and of course, my plane was shot down the next mission.
Well, you're lucky.
What
was the name of your plane?
We didn't have a plane because it developed problems with the self-sealing gas tanks. We picked it up in the U.S. and drove it all the way to South America and clear over to Africa, up across the Sierra, clear to southern Italy, and got there, and they run them through an inspection there, and they found they wouldn't pass inspection. So we used somebody else's plane that wasn't going that day.
So what were the name of some of the other planes that you...
Our squadron had all Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Great name.
And a couple of Betty Boops. You know, Betty Boop was. That's art from Playboy magazine. So they had the Esquire magazine then. And boy, some of those guys were pretty good artists, I'm telling you. That was just as good as anything Disney ever made. And of course, nobody wanted to fly in the Dumbo ones. They wanted to fly in the Snow White ones. We flew all of them, and it never dawned on me so much until you think these things over later on why I passed. Now, one of the waist gunners, and there's a reason everybody, I kept quiet and never said anything, and I had about 5 more missions than everybody else. But they kept watching this waist gunner. Hey, he's getting lots of missions. I had more missions than he did, but nobody knew it. So we got close to the end, got up in the 45s and 50s, and that way you count 45 to 50, count every one. And the other guy, his name was Davy O'Brien. I can still remember it. And where do you think his spot on the plane was? He was on the belly turret, and only little guys could get in that. And he was a little guy. Although I flew it once, but I wasn't very big, but I was almost 6 foot tall. You sit there like you're sitting in the womb, all curled up, for 8 hours. It's hard going. Actually, you come out of that belly turret but the bad part about it wasn't fixed like it was in the B-17. It was a 3-wheel, 2 big wheels and a tail wheel. The 24 had tricycle gear, and the belly of the plane's only that far off the ground. And so we flew more missions than anybody because we never turned any down, and because little guys were in short supply and gone. They always liked to use the armorers because they knew all the guns. You could fly any position on the ship. In other words, now I never had to fly on our ship the engineer and the radio man, they had the top turret. But I could fly it. I could fly the top turret on. But every plane had to have one of those. If you're just a plain gunner, then I flew the nose, I flew the tail, I flew the waist, and I flew the ball turret. And so I got more business than anybody else, if you see what I mean. That's all that saved me. And I went down the next one, and 2 of the bombardier and the navigator, they were up in the front, but everybody in the cockpit, you call it on the nameplate, but up front there, none of them got out. So it must have got a hit somewhere there. Because, see, that bomb bay had like a gangplank. You heard about walking the plank? Well, it had a plank there in the middle. Scared to death walking down that thing when the doors were up.
Wow.
And the big joke of the time, everybody had to make jokes, in other words, about something serious. See, the B-17, most of the doors are hinged, and they motorized them down. These were made like my corrugated roof, and they went up the sides. Looked like somebody's house. And they opened up like this. And so they stayed in a little less wind bothering. But you had all those bulkheads in the front and the back for drag. It didn't help that much. And so you had a back compartment, front compartment, and then a nose compartment. Now the guys got out, and one of the gunners got out of the waist. Now he went out the window, but the tail gunner and all the guys in the main cockpit up front never showed up. But you guess, when I got on the boat coming back where there were 10,000 guys, because the Germans could have made a killing there, everybody, when we got on hey, the bombardier and the navigator were on that ship, same ship that we were. All the other times. You know, you don't think anything about it, but how do you get that many guys on a regular ocean liner? You put cots about that far apart. You hope that guy didn't have a big butt that was sleeping over you. All you had to wash was salt soap. Did you ever try to wash with seawater? Oh, God. And you had to stand up to eat. You didn't have room enough for you to sit down and eat. That's the only place that you had to stand up. You know, that's hard to do. You do it just as a casual thing, but to stand up and eat dinner, it was a killer. The only good thing about it is it took us 14 days, and I read a book every day. I could read a whole book in one day. Well, there was nothing else to do except go out there and look at the ocean. Although we were in a convoy, and we had one of those baby aircraft carriers, but they had a lot of these old Kaiser-built junkers that couldn't keep up with the regular ships. We were on a regular ship, and then they were using those to haul guys back too. And so that's what took us so long to get back. They were under 10 knots, and most of those passenger liners were between 10 and 15. I don't know as many guys as they had on that ship as ours. I mean, it's packed in like sardines.
How did you develop your love of history and become a historian?
Well,
in Camptonville?
The judge was tight because times were tight, money and stuff. But see,
That's Judge who?
His wife, Meek's wife, lasted us. So the first job that I had was keeping her wood cut and the boxes full and stuff like that, and taking groceries up to her because she's long in years too. And in other words, that house was there built after the 1890 fire, and Earl Cleveland never had a house of his own. He and Acton Cleveland were raised in his grandfather's house. That's why he was such a big friend of his grandfather's. His grandfather was really his dad. He said he could get away with anything with his grandfather, but his dad, you couldn't budge. He was a stern character. And so they didn't rent a house or anything. So he grew up in that house, and so he took care of his grandmother there, and he hired us kids and the only place in town that used oak wood was kind of unusual. All the rest of us burned Doug fir. In other words, easy to get and easy to bring in, and all you had to do is watch your stovepipe get too hot. But so that way, and then he gets you and that was the third section. By the time I was in 8th grade, why I was sweeping the store out in the morning when the school was out, and of course I did not when the school was in. And I worked way up to being a little different than the courses now. The people, you went, they handed you a list. You went down and got it all stuffed and put it in bags and wrote out the bill and different setup. And you had to know the price of everything because nobody was going to take the time to put little stickers on everything. And so I was good at that. I was good at math, and not as fast math, but I was good at spelling. The only thing bad was my writing. But if you could spell it right, you could read it. It just wasn't very, very good looking. And but he always hired kids, after I come through back out of the Army, he gave me a regular job. I took a regular job. I was going to be he was going to lease it out to me. He had his fill, the Dutch had. But somebody come along and offered him big money for the whole thing, and so he took the big money. He said, I won't go back on my word. He said, no, I said, I can see right now as the war died down, so did Camptonville. Right after the war, there was all kinds of work everywhere, and they were putting in phone lines and power lines and hauling logs, and there was a demand for everything. That lasted about 6 years, 5 or 6 years, and the hotel started to go broke. They didn't even pay their insurance, never got a nickel for it when it burned down. And so I didn't look forward to that, being in the grocery business, so I went to the sawmills. Being my brother and I, right after the war, I bought his partner out in the sawmill, and just the two of us run a little sawmill down on this ranch. So I know the sawmills, and I'd worked in the sawmills when I was going to high school. Mostly out in the yard, but then one time they sent me over to the main mill, and it's amazing how those mills changed, though, after there was a big demand for lumber. They'd cut 10,000 to 20,000 feet a day, and didn't have any buyers. Sometimes they were 6 months behind in their wages. Those guys are just holding on with a thread. And then Pendolas and Amaral, they come along just at the end of the war when the big boom started, when they needed building and building materials and lumber, and they got immensely rich, both of them, by being good managers. They didn't get it by not knowing the big managing, but they got it. But so from then on, I worked in sawmills until, and see, when I worked in the store, I also worked at the post office. They moved the post office into the store, so it was convenient for his wife to wait on the customers and do the mail. So as a clerk, I had to do the mail too, even though I wasn't a post office. But they know the things were looser then, if you see what I mean. Nowadays you couldn't get along with hard, but places like Blairsden and all these places that had fourth-class offices, they were always in the store, and the storekeeper was always the postmaster, or else his wife was the postmaster. Hey, we had 6 postmasters in my family, in the Mohawk. Everybody took their turns in the Mohawk post office. My mother knew all about it, so when my sister got the job out here when the Groves family had it for 40 years, and it had the switchboard in there too, but it was fourth-class office. And they didn't object to this non-controlling stuff. You had to get into the third class or the second class before the bigwigs started bothering you. So I never got paid for any of that. All I got was my store wages. Had to get more, I got paid. But when both of them left, I had to do all the work in the post office. Matter of the day of the Camptonville fire, I was just going down there to work. They were both in Los Angeles to a meeting of some kind. And
what year was that?
1959. And so I was in the right place. She died the next year, so I was in the right place, and they didn't have anybody else could do the job, so I'd taken the Forest Service job in the meantime and given up on my post office job. Stupid government won't let you work in two government agencies at the same time. so when I was, they called me down the day after the 4th of July, and that's when the campgrounds were a mess, and sometimes I'd have a helper, but I didn't have any helper that day. And I was there, and I was cleaning up the toilets. There's always a big mess after the 4th of July. Campers don't clean up after themselves. Do you understand that? And I was scraping the poop off the floors. And he comes down there and he said, "You're on uptown right away." And I said, "Well, what's in?" He said, "They didn't tell me, but he told me you get out there and you go back uptown and I'll take care of this. He wants you to stop immediately." And I went up there and found out that she had died. She'd committed suicide. If you want the whole story, but that you really shouldn't put that in the thing. But she died, and I was the only one who knew how to run the post office. So I worked there the next 23 years. How's that?
Until what year?
Until I retired at 84.
And what year was that?
1984.
1984.
In other words, I retired around 60 because my wife said, I said, I can work till 70. They let you work till you're 70. Well, she had retired. She's 4 years older than I was. She said, and you're going to retire.
So tell us about some of the interesting people that lived here in Camptonville.
Oh, goodness. The interesting people, for when you were growing up, everybody knew everybody else because everybody in town stayed here, lived here. Let's put it that way, that worked here. And it was different when people working in sawmills up here come from Grass Valley, Nevada City, Downingville, and scattered. And hey, some in the Forest Service, they were like their own little city down there. And sometimes those rich, they always broke out in the new Rangers. Once in a while they'd have that old guys, but they'd break them in, and we were about the smallest of the Ranger districts. And hey, some of those guys just out of college come up, you wouldn't see them in the store for 3 weeks. They didn't have the least idea that you're supposed to be part of the town. Not the least, and things changed then, because they brought people in from everywhere, and the CC boys came from Missouri in 1936, I think it was. And that changed the whole town. And but the main thing was a lot of the people didn't have cars. The older people didn't drive from the horse. Some of them did, the younger ones, but just the young people all had cars. But so they started having dances that they used to have. You drove a wagon from one town to ride. And my mother said, see, part of the family was in LaPorte and the other was in Mohawk. The Guards, her family, were from LaPorte, and her husband had been in the Mohawk Valley his whole life, or a good part of his life. And so they used to ride clear over the top of the mountain there between that shortcut from Mohawk up the Jonesville Road. Have you ever been over that, up in the meadows up in there? And you go over there and drive. Took you all day in the wagon to go to a dance, and all day to come back, and you danced all night.
Sounds fun.
But it was kind of, it's hard to explain my dad and my mother being cousins, but when you look at that family tree, I can't figure out whether it's a second or a first cousin, but there was one guy in there that was related to both sides, if you see what I mean. And my grandmother used to tell me about, she used to, when my dad was born, she used to hold him in her lap. He would just go. In other words, they all knew each other long before my mother and dad married, because they were all the same relatives. And so when my dad had, in 1919, he figured all these motor things, and he moved over and he had one horse. Meek still lived in that barn down there, right across the street from where the Pelton lot is, for $25.
So Leland, tell us about the Bill Meek diary. Can you tell us how you went from finding the Bill Meek diary and why you went ahead and it had such an important impact on your life to the point where we published this book?
Yeah. Well, it starts with the fact that Acton Cleveland took over for his grandfather and spent his whole life in Camptonville doing more than even, except he drove a car, he didn't drive a wagon or anything. But so he took over when his grandfather died, and so he had all of his grandfather's stuff. Well, he died, like I say, and well, easy to tell when he died. He's born in 1900, and he was 89 years old. He died in 89. And so his wife gave the lodge, because they were both responsible for keeping the lodge going all this time. See all the ones up in the mountains folded up, except here and there, like a bigger town like Downeyville and Forest. They eventually come down. No one left up there, Sierra City. They're still hanging in there. And we're hanging in there just because Nevada City and Grass Valley guys. But anyway, his wife gave us all of his stuff and all of his books and stuff like that, and his writing, those 6 notebooks that he wrote were there. And I thought, boy, this is great history. And then of course my stupid brother told me, he said, I saw those. I used to read them when I worked in the store. See, all my whole family of kids worked in the store sometime or not. You call it cheap labor. I got $5 a month.
So you found his autobiography
in
the store.
And so,
Okay.
But I didn't know about that. But I knew about the judges because he kept telling me about all these loose leaf stuff, and they kept down at the county seat trying to get them from him so they could, in other words, he knew all the people in the supervisor's office and the supervisor's schools and all that. He wasn't active in that, but when they wanted anything done, that's where they went. So he started writing his history, and he had some of his thing, and I had both of them. And all of a sudden, his wife said, "Hey, I want them back on." I said, "Acton's things there. The county wants to put them in their files." And I said, "Okay, but I didn't mention Meek's book." That was not very nice of me. You don't want any of the Masonic stuff? Because I wanted this so bad, to keep it, and so he never asked for it back.
Well, and so what interesting...
Because they'd have just buried it, if you see what I mean, in a box somewhere. And so, but hey...
You took the manuscript back, and you started reading it? And
I took but you happen to know I made a copies of it. But I noticed some stuff. They must have let those loose. That woman that writes for that free newspaper there, Mrs. Lang. She was at this side of Browns Valley there, and she had some stuff there that was in Acton's papers, not in Meek's book, about him. And I don't remember him. He took care of that one guy that had cancer that was a Mason over there until he died. And said, when you're a Mason, you're supposed to take care of him. And she had that in there, and she had some other stuff. I sold her one of these books, but I'm not sure but I don't think that's in here. Anyhow, a lot of the stuff that he got from his grandfather's thing, but a lot of the stuff he's got, it's all written on sheets of paper.
Right.
Sometimes typed, and so on and so forth. Wasn't all neatly booked.
Sure.
And I've got copies of it, and I gave them to the History Society.
Good. So, but back to this manuscript of
Yeah.
Bill Meek's. What was it that interested you so much in it?
Well, because it was all in a category that seldom was unorganized like the judges. He judged from one thing to another when he'd think about it, and he'd type them out and put them on a sheet of paper, and then the sheets were all shuffled up, and there was no continuity much to it. Although the first part of the judges were straightened out, like he had about how his mom and dad got married and so on, things like that. That Meek didn't put much about his family in here. He had 3 daughters, and then I noticed out in the cemetery, one boy died when he was young, 3 or 4 years old. But Acton Cleveland was his boy. In other words, he raised him there in the store, and to do all that stuff. And Acton Cleveland went to Stanford for a couple of years, and then decided he wanted to go back and work in the store with his grandfather. So he quit Stanford and went home. And he was judge of the Justice Court. There's several titles they had for that, and he was also like his grandfather, run the road crews out of Camptonville, and he did all and Acton did all the changing of papers for the land. He was good at that. I used to have to read them back to him, so there was no mistakes. You know, read them back a finger. Did you ever do that to a deed? You ever have to do that? I've done back many a deed for him, and he never had any back tie, and he did people's income tax and anything needed in Camptonville. Even if you're having trouble with your wife, being he was the only official in town, you can go down there and complain to him.
So, Leland, what are some of your favorite stories in this book?
The first story is the last page. I heard a guy do that on C-SPAN here the other day. To some things, he said it's not exactly the same language that like Lincoln said in the thing. What we did here may soon be forgotten, but that's what they did here. He's talking about Gettysburg, in other words. Well, and he said in the last page, he says, this is one thing that's age that I lived through that's never going to be seen again. In the United States, anyhow. The horse and wagon days were gone, and they're gone forever. That must have
in Meek's case, the stagecoach days.
Yeah, the stagecoach. He drove the last stagecoach out of Downeyville in 1914, and so he put that little musing there, and I thought that's a great saying there. But I don't. He must have thought it up himself. He wouldn't have been reading these other history books, but they use that frequently. That phrase, that sort of thing will be gone and never to be seen again. Not like some things they can drag back. They're not, and they're going to drag back. Those guys that got the Hens Pass Road, they went to the back side of town, didn't even come through town, and they got off on the road out of Allegheny. It was built in 1915, so Allegheny could get out of there with vehicles. God. Hey, we passed a whole bunch of going up that Hens Pass Road. When we come back, there's two gangs of Jeeps there. There must have been 15 or 20, and luckily they split up a little bit, but there's no logging going that day. It was on the Saturday, luckily. But they were up on the blacktop yet. They didn't know what was in front of them, that dirt road for miles. But anyhow, that's the part I like best. And of course, the part of the comical part, that he tells about those two guys that were buddies down in Browns Valley. And I couldn't decipher the words in it. It says they made a pact. You know, they drank together and they fished together and they hunted together and they were lifetime buddies. So they made a pact. Whichever one dies first, he's got to go to the wedding, and the funeral, and I couldn't decipher the word on the grave. And it worked, and I looked forth and back and further, and finally I had to give up. I said, well, maybe he'll mention it again. Well, he did, because one of them died. And he said, the one that died, he said he's going to follow the promise he made to his buddy. What do you think it was? Can you remember that? He said, buy a cake of beer and put it up on the grave and invite everybody up for a drink.
Go ahead. Yeah, we will. Yeah.
But that's a real steep hill of Keystone Mountain, steep. And the mine is on the steep side, but that draw comes all the way up from the river and the trail. And they come up that to meet the wagons going to the guys that were quitting morning here. It was pretty well dying down, and so they had a big strike back there. So some of those guys walked all the way up that hill. I don't know what made them think they walked all the way up there, and the stagecoach was loaded. They didn't save anything. Instead, see, the stagecoaches would start down in Downeyville and go down to Goodyear's Bar and up the regular road and come up.
Well, maybe you can follow that up with talking about the importance of Camptonville to the transportation routes in the 19th century, and why Marysville was so important to.
Most of the people don't understand that. Downeyville, and the Downeyville books don't have much because it's Sierra County. He got all of the Sierra County things in there, but the ones that he don't have too good, he had to get information for him. It was the school principal was there for years and wrote it. And I could see, and he had Foster's Bar on the brain, because Dinahville and Foster's Bar, Goodyear's Bar were the only towns that you could call a town on the river. Sure, the Indian Valley had a town, and Slate Range Bar, they had a store. I don't know if they had a stopping place down there on the river or not, but they didn't need a stopping place in Indian Valley, because just for the pack trains that went through, they could handle them, because to get to Brandy City, they never did have a road, even for the later one, they say. But I never was over on that road, so I don't know. So it's kind of odd being stranded down there in that hole in Downeyville, and all that information they kept. And Nevada City has tons of information. There's nothing about Camptonville, because Marysville's not interested. That's agriculture down there. They're not interested about all the old places that they built. Hey, they manufactured just about anything you can think of there in Marysville at one time. But what gets me is those 50,000 mules down there in the wintertime.
And during the gold rush, all the supplies would come to Marysville.
Right.
And then what happened from there? How did they get the supplies from Marysville to the mines here and to Hamptonville, and then up over the Sierra?
They didn't, not too much on taking them over the Sierra, if they could get away with it, because there's people coming from the east over there. In other words, now the mining over there, that's a different story, like that over around Tahoe, and that's just difficult to get to, and that only lasted for a short time as a big thing, and it's difficult to find anything about Camptonville. And when they do find out something Camptonville, they're not sure that it's right. But even though some of the stuff, he didn't have it right about the mountain houses. I never heard that until Meek had it in his book here. Then I got to looking at his book when he had the map, it showed it on there. He didn't read his map very good. And those guys, now the clampers have put a thing up there at where the road, the Endless Pass Road turns down to Downeyville. They made it on a plate with a electric Wednesday, and hey, it's good, but they got it as being a Cornish house there. A Cornish house is clear up over the hill there. But it would have been a nice place to put the Cornish house, and they got that as Medoff's cabin there. Well, the Medoff, I thought the cabin was back in on that first turn, but hey, they always corralling me. I go to that bar down there, and there's always some relatives from Allegheny, and the one Medoff's daughters was worked in the post office here, and she said, but she got cancer and died. And I said, well, she said, that was my sister. And she insists that that's in the right place, that's where they had a place there, stopping place and everything, in that nice big flat where the road takes off to Downeyville. So that somebody says fork in the road, and they don't know what the hell fork they mean. Because see, that's as far as the road from back east, or from Truckee and Nevada, went, was right there to Downeyville. And then they built a branch going over to Forest, and naturally Forest had, and Allegheny, and naturally they had connections clear to Nevada City.
Can you say something about the importance of the roadhouses along the main transportation route here, and what the name of some of those places were, and some stories about those roadhouses?
Yes, it's but after seeing that, I stopped there the other day, and here's this new thing sitting there with the road, not Mullenhoff, but that's my doctor's name, but something like that. The road went down that's as far as the Hannah's Pass Road was right there. And that was the way to get to Downeyville. But Downeyville had that road come up and met it there. But then they run spurs in all directions all the way clear to the valley from Hannah's Pass Road.
So where did the roadhouses start outside of Marysville? And how far past Camptonville did the road?
No doubt the 7 Mile House. See, the spot down there you can make good time. And the next one up would have been Landerman, or Browns Valley. They had stopping places there. This is a regular little town. And then you go up to Landerman's beyond there. That's the woman I was telling you about. They had a stopping place there. And then they had another one in later years. I don't know if that was from an Indian, a woman what the heck they call it? She had a chief so-and-so for a boyfriend. They had a place down, next one would have been Oregon House. All about 8 to 10, if there's no heavy uphills involved, they're at least 8 miles apart. Or like in Camptonville, when you got close to a town, we had 3 of them within 6 miles. But because, see, we're right at the end of the Yuba County. And they picked us, that border Sierra County, because this is where the snow starts.
So what were the names of the roadhouses that were east of Camptonville?
Oh, east of Camptonville. Well, the Slaveville house was big. He was there right from the start. When the pack trains came up the river through Oak Valley, they turned and come up to the ridge at Slaveville house. Now, I'm going to have to show you that pond out there where they put the turkey ditch sometime. That guy up there showed me where it was. It's got trees that big growing in it now, of course, but it's a good-sized pond. They never got enough water in it to make it worthwhile. But anyhow, that was the first place. The mountain house would have been, the original mountain house would have been the next one. And then the new mountain house, when they built the road to Downeyville in '59, you went all the way to Downeyville with a wagon. Except from that road up the ways there, where they went down the hill into Downeyville, and it wasn't, instead of you go down the point, it's going to be steep. Unless you seesaw down like you do in most places of the river, you have cutbacks to get a decent grade. Well, it doesn't have a very decent grade. I don't know what the grades are on it, but anyway, so, and then the next one would have been with that that monument they put up there. It's the other day I saw it when I went up there. But it's pretty neat the way he did that with it made it look like brass, and he used a brass rod, and he made letters. Do they do that? Some guy does that? It's one of the clampers.
Was that at Cornish House?
No, they call it Cornish House, but it's this side where the road turns down to Downeyville.
Was Cornish House another roadhouse?
Yes, the Cornish Camp, but it has 3 different names, so it's confusing. Because Meek stopped there on his way back, if you remember, in there. Don't you remember the guy that had biscuits, raisins in the biscuits that he cooked them? But he said there was nothing left but the foundation and the walls, and the guy had canvas stretched over the top of it. And if he went through there when he was a kid, that would have been around 1870. It was already long gone. How I know that his dad, well, he got his, he was born in '56, so you figure he was 16 years old before he got to packing. And you know why he was up there, don't you? See, he went clear over to Cisco that way. You know where Cisco is, don't you? He went clear up over the mountain, clear to where the railroad was. They went up there and got some cattle up in Oregon. They drove them all the way down to Camptonville for the butcher. The big trouble, after traveling all that distance, the guy kept going. And they got away from him. And they never caught him up with them until they got clear over there at Cisco. And they went up the Hudson Pass Road, and of course it goes over towards Truckee. But they went off to the right there and went over, and before you go up Cisco's on the way up to the summit, you understand. Cisco Grove and those. That's where all the skiing used to start, was there at Cisco. Now they got all of them up with high altitude. And it's not very far to the Nevada County roads over there. That's where they built that town up there that they have their homage to. Where it didn't last because they couldn't get the gold out.
Meadow Lake.
Yeah, the lake. And it was a waste of time. But see, that's where the Ennis Pass come up. 2, one come up from Truckee and the other one come up from, and they met up there just about where the pass is. That's where the water changes. See, the water on the Weber Lake drains the other direction, whereas the one downstream this way a little ways drains this way. So that's how they determine the path. But the highest place on the one of those pieces in the, I'm going to have to get out my USGS map and see. They said the highest point on the, one of them said the Bald Mountain above Forest there. It's high. And the next one said that hill on the opposite side of Keystone Mountain. It's higher than Keystone Mountain. They had things at Weber Lake where you changed direction. And from there on, they don't have any more. But what there was between there and Truckee, or there and Verdi, I don't know. I imagine they had one at Verdi. That's the stopping place.
Maybe you could talk about the early transportation here during the gold rush, of which Camptonville was still a hub. Why was it so important that they use pack trains, mule pack trains here in this area?
Well, it's all ridges and canyons, the Sierras are. And sometimes the ridges are by themselves and rivers are on one side and rivers on the other, but most of the time they split off onto, and I noticed Meek mentioned that in his book. I had to learn that the hard way. These points run off of there, and then they're formed canyons of their own. That's the creeks. And so Camptonville was next to the port, was the easiest way to get to Downeyville. I mean, not to get to to get into the gold rush country. In other words, because and to get back east to Nevada, you only had to cross Bowler's Bar on the North Fork of the river, and you're there. You climb to the top of the hill there, and you're on the Camptonville Ridge. It's not that, I gave it that name, it's in the book. It starts down there where it comes into the thing. I've been clear down that miner's trail down on the river there. That starts up and it doesn't quit till it gets clear to Verdi. I mean, clear to the summit.
And why would they use mules instead of horses to pack with?
They got what?
Why would the packers use mules instead of horses?
Oh, well, mules are more valuable on these steep mountain grades. They're much more sure-footed, and they eat less and have higher energy. Horses do fine, but more horses fell off of those trails than the mules did. And a mule just happens to be have a wider appetite. Horses, the appetite's a little bit narrow, but I noticed one woman over there ruined that orchard over at the Groves Plowing. With her horse, he ate all the bark off all the apple trees, just like a mule would. And the only time I remember that is going in, my brother got a packing mule one time, he and my uncle, who was about the same as my brother's age, and he got a mule. The only bad thing about packing stuff into the English bar, mine, or claim, that mule had to stop at every tree and munch on. Eat the bark right off the tree. And same way with the donkeys and jackasses. In other words, they can make it out there in the desert where not many animals can live. They're tough. And the mules, I saw the comparison there one time, but the main thing why they liked them for the mountains and the packing. Oh, so they'll slide off and fall into the river too, and they'd have to shoot them, but because there's no way you could get them back up on the trail.
And were the pack trains going to the mines?
Yes. They come from Marysville, and from Downeyville they was out to the mines, and they went clear over the hill to the Mohawk Valley first. That's where Meek was born, on that trail. They went up that direction towards the Johnsville and that area. And I said, well, hey, that's almost at Mohawk. And they tossed the idea of going across the Sierra, crest of the Sierras there instead of the Yuba Pass, but it's called Yuba Gap at one time, and then when they called conflicted with the Nevada County names down there, they keep changing them around. And so, but it'd come later. They took most of those pack trails, went up where Meek was, where they went north and to get out of the Sierras. See, once you're out of the Sierras, it's easier going. It's maybe high altitude and tough, but it's flat by comparison. Of course, there's creeks and canyons, but see, the big canyons in the Feather River don't start to get down there just below Nelson Point. There's spots down in there where nobody ever was that didn't make their way in there on a trail. There were not even any miners much down in there. It's worse than the Yuba up there. It's got up there at the trail there, the Lilyfoot Trail, 3 box canyons in there that you can't get up the river. But see, there's no falls in the river amount so much. And that's why these guys are trying to get rid of all this stuff and put salmon back in there again, because there's one of the few native species still left here that has not mixed with the hatchery ones. Now, don't ask me how they tell the difference, but they get after them at angle rights. They can't get over there very good, or get over there at all, and then they have a hard time over that little dam out of. Now that company wants to put a dam in there with the water that comes in that's dammed up there, while some other method they want to use that water for hydroelectric. Do you read that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you say something about the stagecoach transportation routes here in the Camptonville area?
Well,
how did they select what routes?
Up here it's a little different than it was out of Sacramento, where they used a lot of those ones like you see in the Wells Fargo ad. But however, there must have been some of them come up here, because Meek said in his book there that there was one going down into Bullards, down over those cliffs there somewhere. If somebody ever found it and hauled it out, I don't know. But it got away from them and went down over there. But all the wagons, if there's any pictures of it in this country, were all just regular wagons. And some are passenger wagons and some are freight wagons, and there's some, just like automobiles, some SUVs. Then you saw the picture when they started using cars, you see all the suitcases on the fenders of my dad's old Rio. No trunks on those old cars, you understand. You had the running boards, and and he didn't have a little fence. I got one in the garage here that you clamped on your running board to hold.
Your dad was a stagecoach driver also.
Yes, that's what his dad, his mother, run the hotel as all the cooking parts and all the bed parts. My mother.
What year was that, probably?
Well, the town was in below there, you understand, the town where the mining town was, but they were up on the road above there where you couldn't get down to the bluffs where the town was, so the stage come by up above there, and you see that side road. One of these days, but I can't get around good enough, I was going to take that side road and see how bad it is down there where the town was. But their stopping place was there, and of course, through the years when the stopping place, she stayed there until that 1926 fire or 27 fire burned her out.
And what town was that? Nelson Point?
Yeah, burned the hotel there. It's one of those stories about they had it all whipped, they licked, and then the back wind changed and the backfire burned, come in and burned the hotel. You know, the backfire is about all the thing they had, but see, once it gets after dark and the wind dies down and the wind's moving the other way, it changes direction. And if it's a good hot fire to start with, it's that kind of a bird here. Don't tell me there's bats anymore. There used to be hundreds of bats around. Hardly any bats anymore. No old places, they pump people live in anything nowadays. But there used to be a lot of empty houses here in the Depression years. And hey, there's hundreds of bats out every evening.
People moved away during the Depression.
Pardon?
In Camptonville, during the Depression, people moved away from Camptonville?
No, the old-timers stayed around and worked on the WPA, the ones that were past older guys, in other words. Most of them got a the PWA was for a little bit, and then they had the WPA was the biggest one. And they come in every once in a while and put a bunch of them to work. In other words, but they had little claim, most of them had little claim that they worked with families. But the big families, that had the ranches, they raised potatoes or something like that. But they soon left. It was too rough a go. They moved over around the Redding and that Red Bluff in that country. The Humphreys did. But see, he used to bring potatoes into the store. A lot of those ranchers did. Something you could grow here in a quantity and trade it for other things that you couldn't. And so the store benefited from it, and so did the local growers. And that Garden Valley, that's when they got started here and they needed food. There was no food up here. There was no Indians didn't grow any food. They just used the food on the land. So they used places like Garden Valley was one nice great big meadow with a thing around the and you had all the water you want. So down there is where they grew all the food for Camptonville. Until, in short order, all the tailings covered it up with nothing but rock piles. Now they didn't. The dredgers.
Hydraulic mine tailings.
Huh?
The hydraulic mine tailings.
Yeah. But when they changed the laws, the only one that had a dam there to start with was Jewett there. It stopped his tailings. But see, they wouldn't have gone down Oregon Creek for Celestial Valley, but there was a lot of rocks in Celestial Valley too. They were. I don't know of any big diggings that emptied into Oregon Creek. Do you?
Not big diggings, no.
Yeah, there was.
What about native people in the area?
Yeah, can you tell us something about Native Americans that lived here in the Camptonville area?
There were shortage of. There were none here. And the last Chinaman, they said, left in 1911. So both they were gone in my lifetime. And the Challenge area, and but there's evidence of up little creeks where they could come down the wintertime in this area, cut down moonshine and no big snows. That's only 5 miles away. And even some of them settled in Garden Valley. That's lower elevation. Got rocks alongside my brother's house down there, had grinding holes in it. And it's right on top of a knoll. They used a place where they had when they come down from the other. But
and what about Indians living in Indian Valley?
That's different. They come down there and see that's on the river, and that's low elevation, like about similar elevation to Camptonville. Growing. I was amazed to find that in that bank, in that book that Meek, but he tells about all these little creeks and rivers running off of the main ridges everywhere. And then see you get up to a place like Keystone Gap, and the river's right over here, and the river's right over here. But you come inside, and I'll show you the most important thing in my life that did the most for me was those 50 missions.
Was what?
Those 50 missions were one of the most important things that ever happened in my life. Why? One more mission, and I wouldn't be here, and none of those plaques would be there.
Yes.
That's the first one. And nobody notices that, I put them up that way in the category, and the next one is the postmaster. Well, how often do you go from being scraping the shit off the floor in the Forest Service John and going up and finishing the job at the post office, and it's hectic when you hadn't worked. I hadn't worked for a couple of months, and remembering all the things. I broke in on that new. See, this was a new post office, away from the store. They built a new one away from the store, and it's bad that the postmaster had to die, but that's the biggest break in my life.
Yes.
Why did I have that break? Because I knew how to do all these things, and it was always available. Like flying those extra missions. I never turned down a mission. That's what pays off in life. That's because they had a woman. This is the joke part. they were breaking in to take my place, and she got pregnant.
So let me ask you, what are the things that you still would like to do in your life?
Oh, yeah, I enjoy the little things like the Sierra Nevadas here, but after watching that thing of the Yosemite Valley down there, we're a bunch of pikers. on Channel 6 there, they run through there again. Those crazy people having to go to the top of that half dome. Why don't they just stay off of there? Idiots. You ever been on Half Dome, have you?
No.
God. They got a cable run up there that you have to hang on to, you know. Hey, it was years before anybody got up there to start it.
So would you like to go to Half Dome?
No, I shouldn't go. Everybody went to Yosemite. We went one time, but my brother and I, we had something else. I didn't get to go, and so I never made it to Yosemite except take Boy Scouts up there one time. Now, it wasn't Yosemite Valley. That was up to Tioga Pass.
Where else would you like to travel to that you haven't been before?
The Chinese,
To China.
the wall. I like that picture of a Model A Ford driving down that. You ever see that? That teaches a little bit about dimension, and teaches about those bad guys have always been around. That was to keep those bad guys up there where they belong. Now they out there with road bombs and stuff. It's a different world.